Hello, welcome to Outbuilding. I build things on this channel, and today I'm going to work on the workshop. The workshop bench that I've been building is for the table saw. I've taken a break from that, but I'm getting back to it, and I've got the slide action done, so I'm going to have sort of a sliding sled for the table saw. Table saw is going to sit here on this deck, and I've got a few other things to do before I move the table saw over. So first today, I'm going to build the cabinet carcasses kind of where I'm standing. There'll be one here with drawers this way, and one here with drawers this way. Get that in there. That'll square everything up and get it really locked together so that I can move it. And then I'm going to build a perimeter frame around here that matches the height of the slide, and so that the saw can sit in between those, and that creates the sort of formal workbench. And I've got the Formica. It took a while for that to be delivered. I've got the space cleared out up there, and I've got a rainy day to work and get back into the workshop. So let's get started. Pretty much every time I go to the shop, I sit down at the computer first and kind of sort through my thoughts, make sure I've got everything done. And since it's been some time since I've worked on this, that was helpful to kind of do. I do my dimensions on these drawings in both metric and imperial units because it's almost easier to measure in metric when I'm doing this stuff, especially with metric plywood. But occasionally there's imperial things like the table saw itself that is a different dimension. So it's nice to have them both there, and I'll usually cut to one and then double check against the other one. That's a nice way to go. This box that I'm going to build for the cabinet carcasses, there's two of them, doesn't really have it's got kind of a false bottom, and that's so that the drawers, when they go in and out many times, don't get little crumbles or sawdust or something in there that's going to jam up the slides. And you'll see how that works later. But for now, I'm going to cut out the frames for those. It's pretty redundant, and I'll fit them in the frame and make sure my frames are lined up and square and everything, and get those down before I put the sides in for the boxes. So with those cut out, I dry fit everything and kind of put some clamps on it to hold it in position, and realized it was kind of finicky to keep these things in position, and I was going to have a hard time gluing them individually. So I decided to pull them out and build sort of a frame out of the whole thing. And I used the pocket jig for that, and I haven't used the pocket screws that much, but this was a perfect case for doing them in this kind of thin plywood, and they went together pretty well. The only thing I learned about pocket jigging is that you really need to, like, once you've drilled the holes, you need to clamp everything down really tightly when you go to screw it together, because it tends to kind of want to move around when you screw it together. But if you clamp everything, glue it, put it together, it's very fast, it's nice and strong, and it's a good way to do this, so that I ended up with a frame that I could set down in there and not have to manage all the individual pieces, which will just make it easier to assemble. After a little cleanup with sandpaper, I was able to set this down into the frame and test it, and then it kind of revealed that I need to square things up a little bit, so I'll work on that next. So the next thing to do is to cut out the carcass sidewalls, and these are just straight cuts, trying to get everything really square and evenly matched to build up the boxes. And I started with the sides, and I'll do the tops later. All right, well, I made a little boo-boo here, and it's one I can recover from, but I'll show you what I did. These little boxes are inset from the outer face frame here. So then on this side, I did the same thing, but I added the offset in again. So the offset's already here, and then I added it in again here and got the dimension right. What I need to do is extend these panels by that offset. There's an offset on both sides that I miscalculated, so I'll just biscuit join in a piece It's hidden by the frames, you won't see it, and I won't even think about it probably after I'm done, but I have to pay attention here. This material is expensive and I don't want to screw it up. So biscuit joints are pretty cool. You use a little tool that has a saw blade that kind of cuts a little kerf into both sides of the material. I'm putting out marks here, and then I cut the grooves. The grooves end up making kind of a little football shape, and they have little biscuits. They're little wooden biscuits that conform to that shape, and you just glue those in. It helps the two pieces stay in plane with each other so that they're really flush, and is a nice way to put a joint on a piece like this. Since it keeps them in plane, it's pretty easy to adjust everything and get a nice clean fit. And you just match up your marks at the ends of the board, clamp everything up. And in this case, I was able to salvage the same piece of grain, so you can't even really tell when it's all done because the grain matched. So when it's all dried out, you take the clamps off, sand it up a little bit, and you've got a board that you've grown in length, which is kind of nice to have every once in a while. All right, I got these boxes all dry fit, and they look pretty good. I'm going to use kind of a combination of biscuit joints and pocket screws to hold it together. The biscuit joints are really good for lining up, for instance, this outer edge with the top and making sure that those are in plane with each other. Pocket screws are good for kind of creating a T-joint, like the walls of this going back into the side. So I'm going to sort of mark this and pull it apart and cut the joints as I go, and then I'll start putting it all back together, but gluing it in and securing it. And there's a little bit, like I've got these spacer blocks all over. These things move just a little bit, and so I'll pull everything tight and get it all square as I put it together. And so I'm kind of thinking through how I do that. But so far it looks pretty good, and I was able to salvage those two pieces, no problem. Put this together and get it squared up. All right, this one is dried out. I've got all the clamps on there, and it's a lot of clamping because I'm trying to get it all square and super rigid. And so far it's worked really well. I've got one more panel to do here, and then I'll start working on the interiors of the cabinets before I put the lids on them. I should explain why this is taking so long to get this project done, and it's mostly because I'm working on 3 different things at once. We're building a cabin, and I got all the plans done this summer and was working with 2 different engineering groups for both the cabin and the garage design. I did the design work, and we've got that all submitted to our county now for building permits. And so it's out of our hands, we're waiting on it, and now I can get back to doing these things and also editing video. I was spending so much time at the computer doing the CAD work for the design that I didn't really want to spend more time at the computer doing editing. So I've got a lot of videos from this progress of all these different projects that I'll get caught up on as we go here. Right now I'm working on the workshop. That's the workshop playlist. And so if you want to watch just the build of that, if you subscribe, you can keep track of the workshop playlist and see just the build of this workbench and the other things in the shop here. We're also working on a van because we're tearing down the cabin and we have nowhere to stay. And so we're staying in the van. And right now the van is sort of an expensive metal box, but I'm sort of putting in the floor, and we'll do a full build out of that with power and water and all the things that you would need in there to kind of make an RV out of it. And so that's another build that I'm working on right now as I need it. And like I spent the night out there recently at the coast, and it started to get cold, so I'm inclined to get the heater put in. Anyway, that's the second project, and then the third project is the cabin itself. And right now we're tearing down the cabin. We're getting the permits figured out, and then in the spring we'll start putting in the new cabin foundation and go up from there. So a lot of different projects. That's why it's taken so long. I've actually got, like I said, I've got a ton of video. I just haven't had a chance to edit it. So as we get to some rainier weather, I'll get caught up on videos and get you caught up to these different projects. Again, if you subscribe, you can look at the different playlists for those different things if you're interested, or you can watch all of them, and eventually they will all kind of mesh. You'll start to see all these things come together. Anyway, I'm gonna get back to this. I've got one more cabinet wall to put in, and then I thought about it a little bit. I think I'll put the drawer glides in and everything because it's just easier to access while it's open, and then I'll put the lids on. Then I should have a really rigid frame that I can move and get positioned where it's gonna finally be, or up near there. So we'll get back to work. So my drawer glides are going to be pieces of MDF on the side here with slots in them, and I'll put a link to a video that I did where I first tried that method and it seemed to work well. I'd seen it online from some other people and went with that for these drawers. The only challenge is that the very bottom slot has no meat underneath it because it's basically right on the floor, and so I've just got a piece of 16th inch material that I cut and ripped, and I'll just glue these in here. That'll act as the drawer glide for the very bottom one so that it's not scraping on this front piece. And that's why these bottoms are open, so that anything that gets in there can kind of fall through. And then the rest of it will be in grooves up here. With those glued up, the next project is the constant shell game that is material in the shop. I had to move things around so that I could get out the MDF, break it down with the track saw, and get it sort of cut down to reasonable sizes. And this MDF's heavy, it's hard for me to manage on my own, but I've got ways I've kind of come up with doing that. And then cut it down to size on the table saw to the sides that I can start putting the grooves in. With the panels cut out, I can now go ahead and put a groove in using the router table, which I got to set up here. And that router groove is that groove is the first one at the bottom of the drawer guides. And then I have a jig that references that for the next one and so on all the way through. So I'll show you that in a second, but first I got to get my first groove in and then base everything from that. I'm just using an oversized bit here, and I need a 7/16 inch square dado on the edge of the board to create the first groove, the base groove, and so I'm just getting it set up here. It always takes me a couple passes with a test piece to get to dial in the dimension, and once I got that set up, I could run my 4 panels through really quick and have the grooves all ready to go. So with those grooves in place, then I set up the handheld router with a 7/16 inch groove that I'm going to run and use my jig to kind of position it. And the jig is just, it's something that sits down in the previous groove and then kind of as an offset based on the router base to create the next groove. And this works well, but it does sort of create kind of a stack up of errors. And so I haven't really used this for something as deep as this drawer. So it'll be interesting to see how it works. When I was done with all 8 grooves, I measured, and when you think about it, it magnifies the error 8 times bigger than it is if there's any difference between the two sides. So I ended up with just a little bit, probably a 32nd of an inch difference between the two sides, which I'm going to just glue. I'm going to actually just sand down the jig a little bit and add a piece of paper on one side, which I'm hoping is sort of, it's thick stock paper, and I'm hoping that's sort of enough to kind of move it back to being straight on the next pass. This will certainly work, but I want to get it a little bit more accurate because I'll reuse this jig over and over again. With my paper shim in place, I went ahead and ran another set of 8 grooves, and this time when I measured it out, it actually worked out really well. They were very even. It's still a little bit tall, so I could continue to adjust this, but it's going to fit, and I had about a 1/16 of an inch of tolerance in the cabinet to work with, so I was within that, and the drawers will fit in there. It'll work well. So I can move on to getting the rest of the panels done and then start gluing these into the cabinets, which is pretty straightforward. I just glue them up, sandwich them in, and screw them in to hold them in place. The screws really are just to keep them there while it's drying. One more thing before I put the lids on. I was thinking about this while I was doing a different project the other day, and I went ahead and put the back in here, and that lets me kind of see the whole cavity. And I'm going to put the wires in for the wiring. I'm going to have this is got there's a floor-based socket up there where this is going to sit, and so I'll run the wires out and put power distribution around in here. Way easier to do without these lids on. So I'll put the wires in, and then I can drop the lids down. So that's about as far as I'm going to get in this episode, just because I spent more time getting the wiring in and the drawer glides, which I'm glad I did, because that would have been much harder to do after. And I'd hoped to get the frame in on this episode, but I'm going to move it now to finish up the episode, get it up to where it's going to be. It weighs a ton now. Each of these pieces I've added is another 50 pounds or another 60 pounds. And so it weighs a ton. I'm going to put it on the crane, get it up to where it's going to be so that I can kind of get it situated and flat. And then I can use a laser level to make sure that when I'm doing the top frames, I've got everything completely level and flat. And so that'll be nice to have. This floor on the lower level is sort of sloped so that it drains out. Upper one's much more flat. So I'll do all the fine stuff up there. That's where it's going to live when I'm done. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate you sticking all the way through the video. My videos are longer. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff so that this thing gets promoted. And I look forward to showing you the rest of this workbench and the rest of the island as I get it done. Again, this is the workshop playlist. I've got other playlists for the van, for the cabin, for some other things. And until I see you next, I'll be out building. Thanks again for watching.